Welcome back to Careers Explained. Today, we're talking with Ryo Kimura about his career path and role as a senior operations research scientist at Wayfair. He received his bachelor's degree from Oberlin College in mathematics and his master's and Ph.D. in operations research from Carnegie Mellon University. His previous work experience includes being a research fellow at GE Global Research and a data analysis intern at Compassionate Care Hospice. Can you start by giving an overview of what a senior operations research scientist does?
So operations research scientist can mean a lot of things. But for me, what that meant was that I was responsible for designing and developing software that helped Wayfair make decisions essentially using fancy mathematical optimization models. So specifically, I would work on models that, for example, would help Wayfair decide like the best way to order inventory so that products on the website wouldn't run out of stock, and for example, how to make sure that once you order a product, we could deliver them to customers as quickly and cheaply as possible.
Fascinating. Then can you give a breakdown of within that overarching theme, what were the common roles and responsibilities that you had to make that happen?
So I would say there were kind of three broad aspects. So my primary role, I would say, was essentially acting as a software developer. So most mathematical optimization models are implemented using software. And in my particular role, like I was very involved in that implementation. So like adding new features, fixing bugs, and if there are any questions about the model or what its input and outputs were, I would be able to answer that. The second part is also it's kind of analyzing the data that was related to kind of the business problems that the model is solving. So for example, like I would, for example, to kind of answer certain questions, I would create tables and charts that would show the total operational cost or the total delivery time of like the entire network based on kind of the raw output data from the model, just so people who weren't experts in the model could kind of understand what it was doing. And the last part was kind of more the product and kind of what I would call the product and project management aspects. So this would be, like, example, talking with like the planners who were kind of using the tools that were based on these models and seeing how they're using it, what issues they had, and then mapping out. And then once we can decide, okay, here's a new feature that we want to add, kind of mapping out the timeline for kind of how we would want to do it, what sort of support we would need. Do we need engineers, and so on, and kind of mapping that out.
That's a really helpful overview. So first, the software engineering role, you're making these models to optimize whether it's inventory on the website or delivering products. Then you're almost acting as like a data scientist, showing people who aren't familiar with that data in a more clear visual way, oftentimes sort of hear the insights that we're gathering, and then working as almost like a project management role for the third aspect of it with planning out new features.
Yep, exactly.
And so then can you paint a typical day or week with regards to if you had a regular schedule, how much time are you spending in each one of those three overarching roles?
So I'll start with kind of like the breakdown among those three. So I'll say first that like it really at least for me, it really changed over time as I kind of gained more seniority. And it also would really change a lot depending on which phase of the particular project I've done. So that's, for example, early on in the project, like there might be a lot more meetings with like planners and kind of directors to kind of set set the tone, and then maybe in the middle when it was time to kind of build the software, then we would spend a lot more time on the software engineering parts. But I would say kind of when I first started out, I'd say like probably like 90% of my time I was spent kind of working on the model, the software. So and then 10% on the analysis. So really focusing on that software engineering role. But then as I gained more experience and also kind of when the needs of the business changed, I started taking on more of that third product and project management type of role. And so I still did about 10% of the analysis, but then about maybe 20% of my time was now work spent on project management. Then the last 70% I was still doing kind of the software and the modeling.
That's very helpful to understand those proportions. Most of the role, even as you kind of got more senior in the role, was focused on the product development, and the other two kind of shifted, but still were a more minor part. And for the software development role, can you give a sense of what that looks like if we were to follow you into the office? Are you working alone on your computer? Are you working collaboratively? What would the visual look like?
So I would say, with respect to kind of the modeling the software, I'd say I mean, again, it depends on the day, but it's probably like 70% sitting in front of the computer, spending time programming and implementing and fixing bugs and whatnot. And then 30% of the time will be spent thinking about the model, or for example, when as you're developing software, when you get outputs from it, you kind of look at the results and kind of try to see if there's a problem and how to fix it. That might involve kind of looking at the outputs yourself and kind of trying to decide what's going on. But also a lot of times I would ask other OR scientists on the team to help me look at the results, or just kind of describe the problem to them, and then we kind of talk through it. Okay, I'm seeing this problem. What could that be? Well, could it be maybe this? Have you thought about this aspect? Yeah.
Gotcha. So mostly independent. Sometimes you can consult with your peers if you have a question, but typically working on your own to kind of create and then test whatever you're making at that time. And then can you give an example? You gave some helpful ideas of what you might be working on in terms of inventory, but can you give an example project that you might be developing some software for in that role?
So I guess I'll talk a little bit more about what I really mean when I say inventory management. So like kind of the central problem is that when you're a Wayfair and you want to fulfill customers' orders quickly, when you have a whole bunch of your products in inventory, you really want to spread it out across multiple fulfillment centers, because that way, no matter where the customer is located, you're likely to have a product. You like to have inventory in a warehouse that's close to them. But on the flip side, if you want to minimize the cost of running your business, you would actually want to centralize your inventory and keep it in one place to save on the transportation cost, save on like the cost of getting the inventory there, like from the factory to the fulfillment center. And so there's kind of this fundamental trade-off between trying to keep operating costs low, while also kind of enabling fast deliveries to customers. And when you combine that problem with the fact that there are a lot of costs that go in, there aren't a lot of operational constraints when you're sending products from the supplier to the fulfillment center. There's a lot of lead time, and you might not know what that lead time is up front. The demand can go up and down, and there's all sorts of factors that start going into this, and you kind of see that it quickly becomes a very difficult problem, especially when you're trying to solve it for like hundreds of suppliers and tens of thousands of products. It's just not something that that even like a team of people can just manage. So that's where the optimization model comes in. We're able to apply one model, one piece of software to automate and make decisions on a lot of that. And to be honest, like the optimization model doesn't always get it right. I think it's a lot easier for people to kind of look at a plan and see if it makes sense, rather than trying to come up with that plan themselves. And so, even though it's not perfect, having something that I can give a suggestion or a recommendation of how much should we order and kind of where should we place it is really helpful. And as you can imagine, like business leaders, they might want to push certain new features, or for example, warehouse capacity, and that becomes really important. Okay, so how do you implement that? For example, like we were originally selling the U.S., but I want to expand to Canada, so now I have to think about imports and exports and tax rates. I mean, how do we want to incorporate that? And so kind of it doesn't need to change it. I mean, everyone wants to make sure that that needs to be accounted for, and so there's always work to do in this field. But it's really interesting. It's really hard, but absolutely fascinating.
It sounds fascinating, taking into account all those different factors which are changing in their own right, and then adding them to the model to make sure that everything is running as smoothly as possible. Not always possible to make it.
And there's always a trade-off, because you can never get it perfect. And you always, I mean, sometimes you have to compromise and kind of what you want to do.
And can you give a sense of, on these projects, is it one ongoing model where, like you said, you're adding in these different factors that might be changing, or are these individual projects that you take a certain amount of time and then go on to the next?
So that's a really good question. As the way that at the our team was set up at Wayfair, we were primarily responsible for creating and supporting long-term software applications that would require a lot of time and investment to build up. But once we build it ourselves, like because because we had built the model, because we had full control over it, we could sort of adapt it and use it and keep using it for a long time as we saw fit. So I definitely I definitely want to say this is not true for all OR analysts. There are definitely in some companies, especially in consulting, like they can tend to be like more like you go do one project and move on to the next one. But in my case, because I was on an OR team on an OR team specific dedicated to a specific company, most of the projects that we worked on were either making improvements to an existing model that was already being used, or for example, if there was a new business requirement that came up, how do we want to start building a system and a foundation that we can build on and continue to build on, and so even though there are obviously phases, but always with like this very long-term idea of, okay, how do we want to make sure this is sustainable?
Gotcha. So you were in more of a long-term area with continuously improving what you had already created, but it could vary depending on the role. And so then can you talk about some aspects you like? You mentioned you find the process kind of fascinating, things you like and find challenging about the role.
So one thing that I really liked about this role was that I kind of got to do a little bit of everything. So obviously throughout my education, I really liked mathematics. And being an OR scientist, I could spend a lot of my time thinking about and trying to be clever with designing the mathematical model to kind of help solve these problems. But at the same time, I also mentioned there's this big software engineering aspect to it. So and I also really enjoyed diving into sort of those technical aspects. There's also this very human element to OR. I mean, ultimately, like, you're using all this technology to help solve someone's problems. So you need to collaborate with analysts and business leaders, and you need to talk to the people who are actually using it. To try to understand that and try to incorporate that. And so being in a position where that's kind of so interdisciplinary, so collaborative, is something that I really liked about this role.
Great answer. And then on challenges, anything you found challenging?
So I guess one thing that I found challenging was learning how to manage OR projects, especially kind of the ones with a bigger scope. So unlike a lot of business initiatives, a lot of OR projects require a very large upfront investment of time and resources to get going. Just because of the sheer amount of work it takes to create a decent working model that you can kind of use to showcase. For example, in the business context, we often talk a lot about a minimum viable product, like something small but simple that kind of shows off what it can do. But in order to create a model, like, you need to design it, you need to make sure that you're trying to solve the right problem. You also need to build it, and then every model needs data. You need to get that data, and you also want to make sure that data you're getting is correct. And so you can kind of imagine, like, it's often quite challenging to get to a point where you have something that's working and can do something, even anything, in all these OR projects.
Continuous learning, but challenging on that front, especially as you're moving up with different roles.
I would definitely say so. There are definitely some positions within operations research that don't require a graduate degree, but I would say most, especially the higher paying ones, typically required to have some sort of graduate degree in, like, either operations research or industrial engineering or management science or kind of any of those related fields.
Gotcha. Very helpful. And so then on your way to this role, you had a previous role as a research fellow. Can you talk about, and an internship, can you talk about things that you did or maybe didn't want in a role as you were looking?
So when you ask that question, are you talking about certain what internships I was looking for during my PhD, or kind of the thoughts that I have about what role I wanted as an operations research or a scientist, like, once I got my degree, and would kind of be stepping into the.
I think more so once you had your degree and you were looking at the job opportunities, sort of what maybe appealed to you or didn't as you were looking for jobs after.
That's another great question. So So operations research is actually a pretty broad umbrella term. So even if you were to go on LinkedIn, for example, and search operations research analyst, there are a lot of different things. There are a lot of different roles that come up. Especially nowadays, a lot of operations research scientist jobs really wants someone who has some experience and expertise in something like machine learning or artificial intelligence. But the part of operations research that I was really interested and what really drew me was optimization. Specifically the types of optimization models specifically the types of optimization models that were commonly used in transportation and logistics. So when I was looking for looking for roles, I was mostly looking for roles again that were primarily asking for optimization more so than machine learning or data science, especially because that tends to be less common, at least nowadays. And also ideally something and then it wasn't and then there was there would be like an extra plus or a star if the job has something to do with transportation or logistics or sort of scheduling or sort of anything in that sort of broad area.
Gotcha. So you kind of knew this specialty that you were interested in, and were shooting for that within this big range of operations.
Yeah.
And when you were looking for this, can you talk about sort of during your career exploration, how did you know about these different areas? So you said there's the machine learning, the AI, there's the optimization. Any advice in terms of exploring these different areas and how you figured out you were more interested in optimization and transportation?
So for me, I guess I think it was a combination of researching keywords like operations research, industrial engineering, management science on the web, reading through the types of problems, reading through the types of problems that I work on and what I thought they were interesting, and then also trying to gain as much hands-on experience with whatever is interested in, whether that be through internships, specific class projects, or if there are any online tutorials that I found interesting, and then whatnot. I would say one of the really nice things about OR as a field is that the core education and technical expertise that you need is pretty well defined, and it's also kind of like a core set of skills that you can apply to a very wide range of problems. So for example, I specialize in optimization, but not because for example, during my undergrad, I had done a class project where I used an optimization solver to create visual art. I thought that was very interesting. During my PhD, most of my coursework is in optimization, but I also took some courses in machine learning because I was interested and I wanted to do that, and I wanted to kind of learn what it's like, and I just learned from experience that. And I just learned from experience doing those class projects in machine learning that they just didn't appeal to me as much as like the optimization ones. And so kind of doing it myself and kind of trying it out for myself and kind of seeing what I liked was how I eventually kind of settled and refined and kind of confirmed that yes, even within OR, I think optimization specifically is something that I liked.
Those are really helpful tips of one you can try through internships, get a job, or your classes, and then also outside of those more formal areas. You mentioned you can look up sort of typical questions. And would that be something that people can easily find through a Google search, or do you have tips in terms of how to find the types of questions that these roles are targeting?
I think I would like to think that most of this information is pretty easily available through like basic web searches. I also really like YouTube specifically. So Informs, INFORMS, is the professional society for OR practitioners in the United States, and their YouTube channel has a lot of videos where they have interviews and short videos. So I mean, you might not understand like the nitty-gritty details of like the models that go into it, but like the problem statement is usually pretty straightforward. Because that's what OR is about. Like you're kind of using this very advanced math to try to solve problems that anyone can relate to.
Great advice, and I like to the point of even if you are a little bit overwhelmed by how one would answer those questions, you'll be trained on that either in school or on the job. So focus more on, do you find it interesting, and are you interested in more of that advanced math?
Yeah.
And so then for people who look at the YouTube channel, see the videos and say, yep, that does sound interesting to me, do you have advice for applying to roles in terms of things to do when looking, or maybe in the interview process, how to be prepared?
The biggest hurdle in a lot of times is having that graduate degree. As having said that, the two things that I would say, especially if for people who want to work in OR in industry as opposed to academia, I would say the two most important things to have are, you want to have some practical experience working on problems in business or industry context. In my case, I got that experience by doing internships during my PhD. And then the other major point I would say is to become comfortable with programming. I would say almost all OR roles in industry require to have some programming experience. And luckily in this day and age, there are many resources to learn how to program. And so really in terms of the requirements, as long as you kind of map out those three things, like that graduate degree, kind of like practical industry experience and programming, I think you're pretty well set.
Very helpful. So the 3 domains to focus on, and then kind of specialization after that, once you know what you're interested in. Any other general career advice for someone either interested in following your role, or anyone if you have more broad tips?
I really do think that sort of regularly revisiting and refining your career goals and kind of working, and once you have the goal, kind of working backwards from there to kind of see how to get there is the best advice that I can give, and what's helped me the most personally. But then at least in my experience, kind of working towards something with a sense of purpose, and even if you change your mind like 100 times later, I think it often makes, as you're working through it, I think it makes just the process a little more enjoyable and kind of more fulfilling than as opposed to when you're kind of working through and just kind of wandering aimlessly and you're not really sure where it's all going. That said, at the same time, let's remind ourselves that our career is only one part of our existence as a human being. And at the end of the day, I mean, there are many, many things that are equally, if not more significant in our lives than how exactly we make money. It's helpful to sometimes remind yourself of that.
Definitely. It's a good balance of perspective you seem to have of one, you work hard and love what you do, it sounds like, and are proud of it. But on the other hand, there are other things. So very balanced perspective that I appreciate, along with gratitude for everything you shared today with your advice and about your role. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.